Eastern Europe. Winter, 1943. Before dawn, an entire army group holds its positions, unaware it is already surrounded. Radio lines are silent. Roads behind them no longer exist. By morning, the front will collapse without a formal surrender. By early 1943, the Eastern Front had changed its rhythm. The rapid advances of the previous years were gone. In their place stood exhaustion, frozen ground, and overstretched supply lines. After the catastrophe at Stalingrad, German forces across Eastern Europe were under pressure they could no longer fully control. Units remained on maps long after they had ceased to exist in reality. The sector in question lay across open plains broken by forests and shallow rivers. It was considered secondary. Quiet. Stable. That assumption shaped every decision that followed. German command believed the Red Army was too weakened to attempt another large encirclement so soon. Intelligence reports were outdated. Reconnaissance flights were limited by weather. The front was held by divisions already reduced in strength. The soldiers sensed the imbalance before it appeared in reports. Ammunition arrived late. Fuel was rationed. Winter clothing was insufficient. Replacement troops were scarce and poorly trained. Orders, however, remained unchanged. Hold the line. Maintain positions. No withdrawals without direct authorization. Soviet forces had been observing this sector for weeks. They moved at night. Camouflage was strict. Artillery positions were relocated silently across frozen ground. Bridges were reinforced. Reserves were concentrated beyond German observation. This was not a sudden attack. It was a preparation carried out patiently, with discipline learned through years of losses. German field commanders requested permission to pull back to more defensible positions. The requests stalled. Higher headquarters feared that any retreat would trigger a broader collapse. Maps in warm offices suggested stability. The reality in the trenches was different. By mid-February, signs multiplied. Patrols failed to return. Distant artillery fire increased without clear direction. Villages behind the lines were reported abandoned. Supply convoys were delayed, then stopped entirely. Radio messages grew shorter. Less certain. Still, no order came. On the night before the encirclement, snow began to fall again. Visibility dropped. The front went quiet. Too quiet. Some officers noted the absence of Soviet harassment fire, something usually constant. Others dismissed it as coincidence. Men slept in shallow dugouts. Weapons were cleaned. Engines were kept running to prevent freezing. No one announced that the roads behind them were already cut. By the time the sky began to lighten, the encirclement was complete. The first realization came not from command, but from the rear. A supply column failed to arrive. Then another. Messengers sent by motorcycle did not return. At dawn, forward observers reported Soviet armor moving where friendly units were supposed to be. The reports were contradictory. No one yet used the word encirclement. Artillery fire began suddenly and with precision. Soviet guns targeted communication nodes, crossroads, and known headquarters positions. Field telephones went dead. Radio traffic became chaotic. Orders overlapped. Some units were told to hold. Others were told to prepare for a breakout that had not been planned. The front no longer existed as a line. It fractured into isolated pockets. Companies fought without knowing what was happening beyond the nearest tree line. Ammunition was expended rapidly. There were no reserves to move forward. No air support arrived. weather-grounded aircraft. Soviet fighters controlled the sky. Commanders attempted to organize a withdrawal toward the west. They discovered that every route was blocked. Soviet infantry, supported by tanks, had already occupied the roads. Bridges were destroyed behind them. Villages once marked as friendly staging points were now silent or burning. Some units attempted local counterattacks. They failed quickly. Fuel shortages left tanks immobilized. Anti-tank guns were repositioned too slowly. The Red Army had learned how to neutralize strongpoints systematically. Artillery first. Infantry second. Armor last. As the day progressed, panic spread unevenly. Veteran units maintained order. Others dissolved. Soldiers moved without direction. Wounded men accumulated in field hospitals that could not evacuate. Medical supplies ran out. Surgeons worked until exhaustion. Messages finally reached higher headquarters. The situation was described as critical. Requests for permission to withdraw were repeated. The answer came late. Authorization was given for a breakout attempt, but no corridor was specified. No coordination was possible. By nightfall, the encircled force was compressed into a shrinking area. Fires burned without control. Ammunition dumps exploded. Soviet loudspeakers broadcast surrender appeals across the snow-covered fields. Some officers destroyed documents. Others burned maps. Units that attempted escape under darkness walked directly into Soviet positions. Few returned. The encirclement tightened. The decisive moment arrived without ceremony. At first light, Soviet artillery opened fire again, heavier than before. Shells fell continuously. There was no pause. The ground shook. Dugouts collapsed. Vehicles burned where they stood. Attempts at coordinated resistance ended quickly. Command posts had been destroyed. Senior officers were dead, wounded, or cut off. Orders were passed verbally, then not at all. The encircled army ceased to function as an organized force. Breakout attempts were launched from multiple points, without synchronization. Infantry advanced across open ground under machine gun fire. Tanks moved until fuel ran out or tracks were damaged. Units became scattered. Small groups fought independently, unaware that larger formations nearby had already been overrun. Casualties mounted rapidly. The wounded could not be evacuated. Medical personnel abandoned positions when Soviet troops approached. Field hospitals were captured intact. Prisoners were taken in large numbers. By midday, resistance existed only in isolated pockets. Ammunition was nearly exhausted. Officers made individual decisions. Some ordered surrender to prevent further loss of life. Others continued fighting until weapons failed. The encirclement was complete in every sense. No relief force arrived. No airdrops succeeded. Weather closed the sky. Roads were controlled entirely by Soviet forces. By evening, the battle was over. The Red Army documented the victory methodically. Captured equipment was catalogued. Prisoners were marched east. The terrain was secured. The front moved on. For the encircled army, there was no formal conclusion. No final report. No clear casualty figures. Units disappeared from records over the following weeks, marked simply as destroyed or missing. The catastrophe was absorbed into the larger movement of the war. Another collapse among many. After the battle, there was no announcement. No official ending. No moment that marked closure. The snow continued to fall. It covered trenches. It softened the outlines of wrecked vehicles. It erased footprints where soldiers had moved only hours before. The battlefield emptied slowly. Not through evacuation. Through absence. Those who survived were marched away. Columns moved east. No banners. No speeches. Only boots breaking the crusted snow. The wounded who could not walk were left behind. Some were collected later. Others were not. Field hospitals stood silent, doors open, equipment untouched. Medical records remained on tables. Names written in pencil. Incomplete. Weapons lay where they had fallen. Rifles half buried. Machine guns frozen in position. Artillery pieces abandoned without crews. Fuel drums cracked open by cold. German units disappeared from the map. Not all at once. One designation at a time. Crossed out. Merged. Declared destroyed. There was no detailed report. No full casualty count. Some numbers were estimated. Others were never recorded. Families received notices months later. Missing. Presumed dead. Location unknown. The command that had sent the army forward no longer referenced the sector. The front line moved. New arrows replaced old ones. The encirclement became a footnote. The Red Army advanced westward. There was no pause to remember the battle. Another offensive followed. Another crossing. Another objective. Villages near the battlefield returned to quiet. Civilians came back cautiously. They found burned homes. Shallow graves. Broken equipment left to rust. Children avoided certain fields. Farmers plowed around metal that would not move. In spring, snowmelt revealed what winter had hidden. In summer, grass grew tall again. Years passed. The landscape changed. Forests expanded. Roads were rebuilt in different directions. No markers were placed where the encirclement closed. No memorial stones recorded the morning it ended. The dead had no shared grave. In official histories, the battle received little attention. It was overshadowed by larger names. Larger cities. Greater numbers. It did not fit a narrative of triumph. It was not useful as a symbol. It was simply loss. Documents aged. Ink faded. Some files remained classified. Others were destroyed. The soldiers who had been there spoke rarely. When they did, details blurred. Dates shifted. Places lost precision. Eventually, the stories stopped being told at all. An army that had once held ground vanished from memory. Not because it was unimportant, but because it left no clear ending. There was no surrender ceremony. No last stand photographed. No moment preserved for history to hold on to. Only a mourning. A tightening ring. And silence afterward. By the time the sun rose fully, the encirclement was complete. By the time night returned, the army no longer existed. And history moved on. Thank you for watching. New historical stories are published regularly.